Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today, I am thrilled to be with Neal Stephenson. He is well known for his fiction that explores cryptography, mythology, linguistics, and in his most recent book, Polostan, espionage. He is among the favorite authors of Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, Peter Thiel. He advised Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. He was chief futurist for the company Magic Leap, where he was developing augmented reality headsets. And he even wrote a novel straight to Audible based on some of the IP that he and his colleagues developed there. His 1992 breakout novel, Snow Crash, became required reading for Xbox developers. And his 1999 novel, Cryptonomicon, which was my first Stephenson read, has been credited with, and I quote, sketching the basis of cryptocurrency. Not only is he pretty good at predicting the future, I think he might be guiding us all to it. Neal, it's great to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks, Doug.
So the cocktail choice is the mezcal margarita, which I'm thrilled about.
Great.
And I'll get started making that.
Okay. Yeah, I like the smoke.
It does have a nice smoky flavor.
Yeah. So
Cryptonomicon, as I mentioned, I have a funny story. A good friend of mine, it's John Hammer, who gave you the book on the swords.
Okay.
When that came out, he called me up and he said, Doug, trust me when I tell you, you need to go get this book right now. So I do. And I call him back and I say, Hammer, this thing is 900 pages. And he says, you're going to read it in 2 days, which is basically what happened.
Wow.
It's just an awesome book.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad you turned out to be a satisfied customer after all that.
Well, it's like it was a heavy thing to carry out of the store.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I appreciate you accepting Hammer's gift, because when you're on tour, it is a faux pas to give people things that they
physical
stuff
objects
into their bags.
Yes. Yeah. No, it can be a problem, but no, it's gonna, the form factor is gonna work with my my luggage.
Cool.
So we got lucky, and it's a lot skinnier than my books tend to be.
Yeah. Right. So you were born. This is a slightly longer drink to make. So I'm actually
That's
for
okay.
the listening only audience. I am squeezing limes into the
manually
the shaker. Yeah, the best
the
I
one
can.
item of bar gear that you don't have here is the tabletop squeezer. With
That's right. I have one of those at home, actually. By the way, do you salt the rim?
No.
Okay, no. So we'll get
thanks.
this out of here then.
But thank you for considering it.
Yeah, we gotta watch our blood pressure these days.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get the big rock in.
Okay.
I'll use these things so I don't manhandle your ice for you.
It's all right. I'm a petri dish of communicable diseases at this point. My immune system's on red alert.
Oh, that's funny.
Nothing can touch me.
All right, well then I'll manhandle your lime wedge.
Okay.
There we go. All right, we are almost off and running here with a mezcal margarita.
Beautiful. It's got that milky look to it.
I love the smoky mezcal flavor. It's awesome.
Yep.
All right, well, cheers.
Okay. Cheers.
Great to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
So I read Born in Maryland, but raised. Yeah,
That
we
is
should
good.
take a moment. It was good, right?
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
Strong.
I'm very limey at the moment. But born in Maryland and then raised mainly in Illinois and Iowa.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Champaign, Illinois. That's where my wife was born in Champaign,
really?
Illinois. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the these are, the Midwestern American college towns, Champaign.
Was your dad a professor or your mom?
Yeah. He was doing his
Same with my
graduate
wife.
work at Illinois, and then he ended up becoming a prof at Iowa State in Ames.
Okay.
But all those towns have a kind of common culture in a certain way. Ann Arbor, Iowa City, Bloomington, Normal, Champaign, the Midwestern American college town sits alone, on the prairie, and there's football, and there's college kids and the whole bit.
Yeah. And I read there were big brains on both sides of the family there. Your dad was an electrical engineer, and his dad was a physics professor. On your mom's side, biochemists.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's not uncommon kind of pattern for academic families to sort of mix and match in these kinds of campus town environments, and so we were one of those. You go where there's a job, and so it's kind of like a subculture, I guess, or at least it used to be. I don't think it's quite the same now. I think the academic become a professor track isn't the sure thing anymore the way it used to be.
In terms of being able to get tenure or getting like Me Too'd out of there, or what do you mean?
More just the assuming you avoid, doing anything that'll get you kicked out. It's just there's less available for in the way of positions, and so you get a lot of people who 50 years ago would have gone straight into a tenure track job. Instead, they're working as contract labor, as adjunct professors, and they kind of bounce around, and they never.
That sort of freelance mentality sort of permeates the entire workforce, not just academics.
That's right.
Code developing is probably where it began. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But.
So then you go to Boston University, where I read, and correct me and Wikipedia if this is not right, but majored in geography and physics.
Yeah, I started with physics, and then I kind of got waylaid by some charismatic geographers, and that was interesting to me because I like maps. Geography is about why are things where they are in the world. Think of the world as a big machine. How is it hooked up? But they had I was taking some cartography classes as part of that, and they had a very early kind of computer graphics monitor that you could get access to for drawing maps. And so I just fell down that rabbit hole and never really climbed out.
I read some book not long ago. It was like 7 maps that explain the world or something like that. And Russia is this way, and so of course the politics and the populations wound up that way. There's just no way around the Urals and the rivers, and you can't go east and west in Russia because the rivers are north-south. That sort of thing. So until the railroad, it was a kind of a different deal.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that stuff.
What kind of fiction were you reading in those days? Who are your sort of?
It's interesting. When I was sort of younger, I was just the classic sort of nerd who sits there inhaling science fiction books, Heinlein, Asimov, Clarke, the usual suspects of classic golden age science fiction. Yeah. And then I had a great high school, or a couple of great high school English teachers who got me to accept, literature with a capital L. And, so I ended up reading, Moby Dick and the stuff that you read when you're studying great literature. And then kind of what happened, I think post-college, was that the big bang for me was Neuromancer by William Gibson. That's 1984. That's a couple of years out of college for me. And he wrote a book that was great science fiction by any standard, but it was written using kind of literary grade prose. Yeah. Which I didn't think you were allowed to do. It's like...
kind of what people say about John le Carré on the espionage side, right?
Exactly, yeah. So, it seems so clear in retrospect that was a great idea, but it just never crossed my mind that you could do that. So
everyone else is writing like L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah. It's great. I love pulp, as much as anyone else, but to me, that was a mind blower that you could cross those two streams.
I haven't read that one yet. I'll get it on your recommendation.
Oh yeah, no, it was a real landmark.
So 84, coincidentally, that was the year of your debut, which is sort of less talked about, the Big U. But you had your debut there with the Big U about sort of college life, and then in 88 was Zodiac. Yep. So how are you, these weren't paying the bills in those days. So how were you paying the bills in these 80s, which is sort of like your mid to late 20s?
Well, combination of things. When I was working as a clerk typist in a library at Iowa City when the contract came through for The Big U, and it was a small amount of money, but it was a lot to me then. And of course, at that age, you're like, oh, well.
Did it come out in hardcover first? Because that's like a big deal.
No, it's a very, very pulpy looking trade paperback. But at that age, you're kind of like, okay, well, my ticket is punched, like, goodbye working for a living. And
I'm a writer now.
Yeah, I'm a writer now. So I quit my job and cashed in my tiny little retirement fund and kind of lived off that for a while. And then the really weird thing that happened, which I still, it's strange even to tell this story now, but in 1984, The Big U was optioned by Ridley Scott.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's so some money came in there,
like fresh off of Alien or something like that.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And nothing ever came of it, but it was. I mean, I think in that era, there was a lot more money floating around Hollywood to option things, and you would hear stories of somebody tossing off a spec script or something and getting $1 million for it. So, but also my wife graduated from medical school and got a job. So between all of those things,
you're married by 84 or 5.
Yeah, we're hooked up by 83. We're married in 85. So that's
a big deal. Like you've got mouths to feed, and you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she had an actual job, unlike me. So mid 80s is kind of living frugally, but not worrying much about money. Mm-hmm. And then, so, I had a very high opinion of myself and ended up writing a terrible book that never got published. And about like 1987, I realized that it was never going to get published, and it was terrible and shouldn't be published. And I kind of had this moment of panic, and I was given this great opportunity, and I threw it away by being a dickhead and writing a shitty book. So, but I've been reading some hard-boiled mystery novels by James Crumley, which are set in a town in Montana, and they're a classic take on hard-boiled detective fiction. So I said, okay, I'm going to write a hard-boiled detective book about someone who's like a toxic waste detective, someone who, because I had a friend, Marco, who was kind of doing that. So I wrote this book in 2 weeks, Zodiac, the second.
You wrote Zodiac in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I wrote it in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Because I was that scared, and so disappointed in myself. And
so fever dreams, writing all through the night, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
That's amazing. How many, pardon the sort of level of weeds of this, but how many, the word count, or what was the number of pages of that?
Well, it's a lot shorter than my other books. I mean, it's a kind of normal sized book. So, but I can write fast when I'm in that mode.
Coffee all night long?
It's just, I'm not a nighttime guy so much, especially now. I probably was more then, but I'm more of a morning get up and crank kind of guy. But there are people who do this. So, I mean, you can kind of tell sometimes if you're reading a novel, oh, okay, he's one of those guys.
Yeah? You can tell if they're a nighttime all-nighter or a morning guy?
No, just a like sit down and bang it out kind of person. So I suspect Stephen King is one of those.
He has some crazy... it's funny. So we'll get into process later, but yeah, and everyone's totally different. Yeah. I know Stephen King has sort of a quota that he lives by. I'm like the anti-quota writer. Sometimes I get 50 words. Sometimes I get, a big day would be 1,500.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't want to skip too far ahead, but one
Okay.
quick question that does potentially span ahead. How many books have you bottom drawered over the course of your entire career? We know of one so far.
Yeah. So, well, there were 2 before the Big U. So that's 2. And then the one I just mentioned, that's 3. And then Zodiac, Snow Crash. I wrote a sequel to Zodiac that was actually not terrible. It just never got published.
Did you show it to an agent or?
I can't remember. But maybe I should dig it out.
Yeah, I was going to say, would you ever resurrect these?
Maybe that one, not the others. And then I think that was the last one, because after that it was Diamond Age. I did the 2 with my uncle, the Stephen Bury books. From at that point, you kind of know how to do it. And so the bottom drawer thing is less likely to happen.
Yeah.
You know, just to, the process of writing a thing and having it suck is so painful and humiliating that, you don't, it's like putting your hand on a hot stove. It's not a thing you repeat.
Yeah.
Right. You're just like, okay.
Well, if you've got, your talent, some people do nothing but repeat that. But how did you, well, did you ever take a class in, you don't have an MFA, I don't think.
No.
I never saw that in your background. So where did you hone your talents? Just trial and error?
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, like I said, I had some great English teachers. But I'm not a big, let me phrase this carefully. For myself, studying writing in a formal program is not a useful activity. And I know for some people it's useful. That's great. Fine. Sign up for the MFA. Whatever works for you. But for me, it was, I just couldn't see what it was going to add. And I was I spent like right after college, I lived in Iowa City for 2 or 3 years. And when I moved there, I had thoughts of trying to apply for the writers workshop. It was a super famous, writing program there. And, but I talked to some people who were in it, and it sounded like a lot of like, write a few pages of a thing and show it to the others and everyone reads it.
Yeah, and you're getting feedback. People like, why would I care what this person thinks?
That was my attitude, Doug. It was like, I just had more of a, I don't care what you think kind of mentality. I just couldn't. Also, I don't like showing things until they're done. So nobody sees my stuff until the book is done. Like, not my wife, not my agent, not my editor. And so the idea of showing, 5 pages of something I just started to a bunch of people in a room, I just couldn't deal with that at all.
No, it's fascinating to hear this stuff because there have been a number of people in the show who have done the MFA thing and it worked out. But as you say, it sometimes happens. But
yeah, I mean, I think you can find plenty of examples of both. So there's no one answer, but it is important. I think for any given person, there is one answer, right? So you need to know which kind of person you are.
Yeah. So 92 comes along, Snow Crash comes out, and as I mentioned in the, up front in the intro, this was a big, big book and really connected with it. I hate to say you have a cult following because I think that doesn't give full appreciation to how big. I mean, you're a #1 New York Times best-selling author, so cult feels like
it's a
too
pejorative
small.
term, yeah.
But it's you have a very engaged, passionate audience that a cult following would have. You're just sort of also mainstream on top of all that. So, and as I mentioned, Xbox developers, it was required reading. I mean, it's so did that change? Obviously, your profile changed enormously there in terms of how successful and how widely read you were. How did that change your lifestyle too?
So the interesting thing about it is that Snow Crash was a very slow build. So it didn't, it's not like bang right away. It was a big bestseller. The book over 30
came out in hardcover and then paperback.
No, trade paperback. My editor, Jennifer Hershey, was incredibly enterprising, clever person who she printed up like 1,000 hardcovers, because at least at the time, if you sent a hardcover to a reviewer, they were more likely to take it seriously.
I see.
So she did that, but the release was a trade paperback.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, like the other day at one of these signings, somebody showed up with like 2 of those hardcovers, and like they're all wrapped up.
Oh my gosh, those things must be worth a fortune.
Yeah, yeah. But it was a paperback.
By the way, I would know because I went and shopping. There's a couple of these. It used to be 20, 30 years ago. If you wanted to find, for writers I admire, and I got a first edition of Cryptonomicon.
Oh,
I like to get their first, and then when I meet them, I say, "Please, would you, sign this?" And so I have a little experience with shopping for Neal Stephenson first editions.
Okay.
And these are not cheap, Cryptonomicon.
Okay.
And that one, if it's limited to 1,000 print run,
Yeah,
my God.
it was 1,000, 1,500, something like that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, but it was a slow build. Okay. So, and it never sold a lot. So the over 33, 34 years, it has sold a total of, I think, 1 million copies, which, is great. I'm not complaining, but it's those are not huge numbers.
No, and especially you make a smaller split on the paper. Your percentages as an author on a hardcover and on ebook are even better than the paperbacks.
Yeah. So again, not to gripe, but it never was like a smash hit. It was a slow build, and I didn't really. Another thing is that now you can sit there on Amazon or whatever, and you can get live updates on how it's selling. That wasn't true then. It was every half a year or so, you'd get a statement from the publisher telling you, here's your sales figures. So you couldn't get real-time updates. And I did a group signing when it came out at the University Bookstore in Seattle. And I was sitting next to another writer, a friend of mine, Sean Stewart, who had a book out. And then a year later, we did another group signing, same place, same group of people, basically. And he turned to me and he said, "So what's it like?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "What's it like?" And I was like, I don't know what you mean. And so he kind of explained to me that it was a successful book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hadn't, he was paying attention, but I wasn't. And so
it was getting steam. It was like, it was getting some buzz. And
yeah,
that word of mouth, that slow build word of mouth sale thing is just the best. I've known a few writers who have experienced that. For example, Amor Towles had a debut novel, Rules of Civility, and it actually didn't do that well. It came out in hardcover, did fine. It was like okay. Then it came out in paperback, and something started to happen. That slow build started to happen.
Yeah,
and then, of course, and that set him up for the next book. And but it often happens, but it takes a while. It takes a while for that to kind of kick in.
Yeah, and you just never know.
It's not like the Today Show where suddenly you sell 50,000 or what? It wouldn't be 50, it'd be 5,000 books that day or something, and then the sort of thing gets kickstarted.
Yeah, and the emphasis now is on trying to get a huge spike of sales in the first week, so you can get a better position on a bestseller list. And so there's a big emphasis on getting pre-orders and stacking up the PR and
getting your social media accounts all in order.
All that. But back then, none of that existed. I feel like an old man talking this way. Back in those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the business was just different then.
Before we get into a section on process, your writing process, I do want to ask you a little bit, this is glancing off Cryptonomicon in some way. And as I mentioned in the intro, it was sketching the basis of cryptocurrency. I don't know how much you agree with that quote, but I have seen that quote. Do you own any cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not a big. It's a really volatile and stressful thing to own. Like if you had a lot of your money,
I'm going to have to top up mine. This is like a very tasty drink here. I can remake all of this.
It would be a big drain on your energy. It was about 10 years ago. So let's see, Bitcoin started in 2013. I think it was probably 2014. I got invited to a conference of people who were excited about Bitcoin, and one of them, took me aside and said, Neal, do you have any Bitcoin? And I said, no. He said, oh, well, you should have some. And, so here's, download this app and set up your wallet. And he gave me a Bitcoin, which was, at the time, it was worth like $250.
Yeah.
Right. So it's gone up and down since then. But
I love these crazy stories from the early days.
Yeah.
Some guy's got a hard drive in a dumpster somewhere with $8 billion of have you seen this? There's lawsuits trying to so the audience knows this guy has an old computer, cryptocurrency. And my next question is going to be, please explain this to me, because I don't own any because I don't understand it, and I'm not going to buy something I don't understand.
Good plan.
But this guy has crypto locked up on the hard drive of his computer. He accidentally has his computer thrown away. It's in a junkyard heap somewhere, and he's suing to get access to it because there's like several $1 billion worth of crypto.
It would be worth it to like rake through this dump.
Miles of a dump. I would. Yeah. I mean, there's so much money on this thing.
Yeah. To find this one hard drive. So right. So that's one example of why, having money in that can be maybe more stress than it's worth.
So someone gave you Bitcoin is the answer.
Give me one Bitcoin. Yeah.
So you own one Bitcoin.
I own right now it's like 0.9997 Bitcoins because I moved it, and you have to pay a little fee to move it around. But basically one Bitcoin, and then some other odds and ends. But
well, one of your gifts in these books is to take this very complex material and make it not only digestible, but you turn it into ripping, page-turning fiction. So, as I mentioned, I don't own Bitcoin because I cannot. No one's been able to explain it to me in a way that I can get it comfortably. So, do you have like a 2-minute version of here's what crypto is and here's why you might want to have some?
Well, let me kind of rewind a bit and just say that because in the 90s, people got interested in Snow Crash and the Diamond Age, I ended up knowing people in Silicon Valley, basically Berkeley, San Francisco, who were early adopters of this stuff. And there's this weird through line, which is that if you're an early metaverse person, if you think about what it takes technically to build a metaverse, at the end of the day, it's going to lead to somebody else's code running on your computer. And that is a security risk. And so at the time, crypto didn't have anything to do with money necessarily. It was just secrets, cryptography. And so people who were interested in the metaverse got interested in secret keeping. How could you trust, somebody else's code to run on your computer? And so there was some startups and a lot of energy around that. And I would sort of hang out with those people from time to time. And I came down once and was hanging out with them, and suddenly they were all talking about money because they kind of realized that, well, if you can keep secrets, if you have a security.
What year was this, do you think? This is before or after Cryptonomicon?
leading up to, so late 90s.
Yeah.
Late 90s. Hey, wait a second, we could be doing money stuff with this. We could be working with credit card companies or banks or something, So, and so Cryptonomicon kind of grew out of that. I was just seeing what these people were interested in. And at the time, the thinking was, okay, to really have secure digital money, what we need is a jurisdiction somewhere on the planet where we can set up our computers, our server racks, where the government can't come in and mess with us. And so a lot of thinking went into finding such a jurisdiction. So for a while, they were in love with Anguilla, which is an island in the Caribbean, where somehow they had worked out that the legal system was going to be good for them. And there were some other guys who took over a platform, an old gun platform in the North Sea called Sealand. They named it Sealand and tried to make it into a sovereign country. They were going to put their crypto servers
Is it
there.
way north, up by the Shetlands or something?
No. It's it's down south.
Okay.
It's just in the war, they planted this thing on some shallow water out in the middle of the English Channel as a military installation, and it was just abandoned until these guys came in and tried to make it into a sovereign country. So anyway, all the energy was around, we have to find a place on the earth where governments can't get to us. Mm-hmm. So to me, watching these guys worry about this was like, okay, to your point, this is a great way to write a potboiler, a actually readable novel about this topic. Because otherwise, it's just nerds talking about math. It's hard to make a story out of that.
Right.
But if you can make it about, suddenly they're like flying off to exotic places to set up their server racks. That sounds to me like a great kind of fish out of water yarn that I could work with. Mm-hmm. And that's interleaved with the World War II crypto story, which is way more, sort of suitable for telling a good yarn.
Yeah. I know Turing obviously is a big character in Cryptonomicon, and it reminded me that I saw this documentary not long ago. It was about Enigma and Bletchley Park and the whole effort there, and they had one guy on there. It might have been the guy who sort of directed it, actually. I'm not sure. But he was talking about the difference between a genius and someone who's very smart. And he was saying this in reference to Turing, who he regarded as a genius. And he's saying when someone very smart puts forward an idea, your reaction is, wow, why didn't I think of that? That is so smart. And when a genius puts forward an idea, your reaction is, holy crap, I never would have thought of that. And I thought it was one of the best descriptions of a genius versus, smart.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that. That. But anyway, what happened was different. So the efforts to build these servers in weird jurisdictions never really went anywhere. But then the technology of Bitcoin makes all of that unnecessary. You don't need to have a special place where the government can't touch your servers because it's all out there in the world of code and math, and
it's not really tied to a physical jurisdiction.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah. So as long as the internet exists and you can move bits around, you don't need any of that other stuff. And that turned out to be a much better idea. Mm-hmm. But it's way less conducive to writing good stories. Mm-hmm. I mean the guy whose hard drive is in the dump, that's a great story.
Yeah.
So you could write a story around that. It's just a different. It wasn't what I was what I was kind of thinking was going to happen in the late 90s.
Well, I have to confess, you have not persuaded me to buy any Bitcoin or other. But based on your own portfolio, I think maybe I'm making the right move.
Well, I mean, you can just look at it. You can just look at it and see the volatility and decide
if it's for you or not.
If it's for you or not. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're happy with crazy levels of volatility, then it might be all right. But it's kind of a thrill ride.
Yeah, and there's so many of them now too. It's not just Bitcoin. There's and they all have their own different market. Like some are suffering and some are not for reasons I don't understand. But
well,
let's jump into process for a minute.
Okay.
So, for example, Polostan, which is again, every time I turn around, I'm reading another great review of this book. It's crazy. I just read a Washington Post review on the way in here today, and so congrats on that.
Thank you.
It's the first in a trilogy. It's book 1 of 3. So obviously there's some planning around that. You have some thoughts about what's ahead, but are you a big outliner?
No. So you do need to know where it's going. But the thing about outlines is, like, a typical situation is that you'll draw up that outline like on day 1 or in the first few days or weeks of the project. But that's a pretty narrow window of time. You're going to have more ideas, over the year or two it takes to fill that out. And if you're sticking too religiously to that outline that you wrote, 2 years ago, you're probably shit-canning great ideas that have come to you in the interim. So you really need, I think, to be able to pivot. Like the classic thing that happens is that you're writing a chapter that you've got in your nice little outline, and there's this character and that character, and here's what's going to happen. But there's a secondary character who needs to be there to fill some role, and suddenly they end up being more interesting.
Yeah.
Than you're, the people you've tagged as your main characters. And, when that happens,
you got to be nimble.
Yeah, that's the muse talking to you, and you need to listen. You can't just ignore that, even though it's really inconvenient, right? So if you suddenly elevate that character, promote that character to greater importance, now you're just peeling off into the wild blue yonder. You don't know where it's going, and it's scary, and it may be inconvenient. You might have to throw a bunch of stuff away or rewrite a bunch of stuff, but you have to do it. So the outline, I think, is maybe a security blanket, and it seems like a good idea. It seems like it's like people seek rationality and structure in the world, and sometimes value that too much.
So no meticulous outline, but is there some written treatment that you'll do either for your own guidance or to send to your agent or your editor to say, hey, here's where I'm headed on this next thing?
So I've been working with my agent and editor for decades now, so they're willing to kind of go out on a limb. So there's not... So I don't need to kind of prove myself or justify myself as much. There's a... I mean, it's not to the extent you're trying to pitch the idea or get people interested in the idea. It's not so much about here's my outline. Mm-hmm. It's about here's the world that this is set in. Here's the couple of the characters. Here's the story of these characters. That's what really matters to readers, and so that's what the seasoned editor is really going to look for in terms of, oh, hell yeah, that I can sell that. I can make that work.
Right. This will be historical fiction, Russian Revolution. We got an angle in. How about if you could paint the picture for us of where you like to write? Is there a particular desk? Can you write anywhere? Can you write in the back of an Uber, or how does it all sort of?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I have done, but usually I just have a small little nest wherever I'm living. It's a little swivel chair and a footstool and some shelves around me to put paper and books and notebooks, and I just go there. I try to. I'm very routine driven. I get up in the morning. I've got about an hour of like waking up procedure,
right?
And then I sit down, and what works best is the day before. I try to stop kind of in mid paragraph.
Yeah.
It's
the
like
the old Hemingway trick of leave yourself a place to pick up.
Yeah. So it's like it's easier to start a car if it's pointed downhill.
Right. Oh, that's good. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah. So
now, are you you're not like the Nelson DeMille writing with a pencil by hand.
I'm a fountain pen by hand.
Is that right? Oh my God. You're like a tech writer.
Yeah, I know.
Writing by hand.
Yeah, but this is a technology. This is a very highly developed technology in its own way. And so is paper. I mean, just because it's old doesn't mean it's not a technology.
There's this crazy story of the astronauts going up. You know this story with a pencil? The astronauts are going up to the station by the moon and it's zero gravity. And I'm like, how are we going to write? We can't get the pen to this. And someone just like, we don't need a pen with zero gravity. Just a pencil will work.
Yeah.
So.
So I mean, I started doing that. I did it occasionally earlier in my career. If I was stuck, I found it easier to sit down and just start writing, as you've done there. Mm-hmm. And then when I started the Baroque cycle, I was kind of like, okay, I'm just going to try the experiment of, I'm just going to start with fountain pen on paper and see if that works. And if it doesn't work, I can just, my computer's right there. It's not like it's hard to switch back. But it worked fine. And, now I've got a whole set of procedures and habits developed around that process that work for me. So there's no reason.
I think I saw soon after Cryptonomicon came out, there was a photo. It was years after. I'm not sure if it was sort of a real look back, but there was a photo, I think, of your office. And as I mentioned, Cryptonomicon is 900 pages, and you had drafts after drafts. It was a photo of a wall that had just stacks of paper that were like the many drafts and research material and things
that
like that.
That was the Baroque cycle, yeah. The full stack of manuscript pages for the Baroque cycle was 42 inches high.
Amazing.
So yeah, I've still got that in a plastic bin somewhere.
How about trusted early readers? So you mentioned earlier you kind of get to the end before you show it, but then who sees it?
I mean, my editor and my agent, Jen Brell, Liz Darensoff. That's about it.
Yeah.
I don't run it by a bunch of readers. It's the same mentality as, when I decided not to join the writer's workshop or apply. It's just, here it is. Putting it in front of a committee isn't going to work. Putting it in front of one or two people
that you trust.
Yeah, that's great. There's definitely value there. But as soon as you put it in front of more than one or two people, you're going to get conflicting takes on it, and then it's just going to turn into mush.
Yeah. So let's turn to Polostan for a minute.
Okay.
It's set at a couple different points in chronologically mezcal.
It's
chronological history. In America and the Soviet Union. I think you and I are both feeling a little mezcal, maybe. But in general, in the early 1900s. And
1920s, early 1930s. Yeah.
And I love that period of time. I'm working on a project that's touching on pieces of that right now myself. So I've been doing a deep dive on the era. And separately, though, it also touches, not that I don't mean to compare the book to other books, because I generally don't like to do that.
Okay.
But in this case, it does glance across a few different works that I have loved in the past. I'm curious if you have either read these or watched these TV shows like The Americans or Jess Walter's The Cold Millions. There's a book, a nonfiction book, John Scott, Behind the Urals, that I wonder maybe you read for some research.
No, that was a big deal for me.
That's a great book. Yeah. And even A Gentleman in Moscow, you sort of like clip that a little bit with, sort of the Soviets taking over the metropole in Moscow there. So it's got such a charming atmosphere to it, despite the fact that there's some grisly stuff also happening.
Yeah.
And it's a ripping page turner as well when you're in your typical style.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, it's the era is interesting to me because kind of my niche is talking about science and technology, but meshing it with politics, military, sort of more mundane things. And there was a lot going on then, and we all know that it leads to the bomb, but those people didn't know. So there's kind of this built-in sense of foreboding that you get for free when you're setting something in that era, and you also know that Stalinism is coming and World War II is coming. So that gives the writer something to work with. So I'm trying to develop a small cast of characters that kind of relate to each other during that era, from about 1934 up to the early 40s, and tell stories about those people. It's
fascinating. I think you handle this so well, because knowing that these cataclysmic things are on the horizon, they're coming. I mean, there are real people, real events. So it's historical fiction. You're following real history here with fictional characters, but knowing that these things are on the horizon adds to the suspense and adds to the drama rather than subtracts from it. Knowing what's ahead. It's really well done.
Yeah. They don't. I mean, there's a few sort of prophetic characters who kind of know that it's really important, but why it's important is hard to explain. It's hard to understand, and so we've there's a character, Fizmatov, in this book who kind of sees it. He doesn't know everything that's going to happen, but he's like, this is going to be a big deal. But there's only a few people who know why.
I was wondering if I would see Armand Hammer here, because you talk about sort of early communist sort of cells in America, even in the 1920s and whatnot. And Armand Hammer was really, his father Julius Hammer and Armand Hammer were the first to get a concession in the Soviet Union, and then he comes back with a bunch of expensive art and Fabergé eggs, starts selling it in America in the 1930s to raise money for, at that time Stalin, but it was Lenin who gave him the concession way back. And
I hadn't made that connection. That's a great point. The Hammers, what a wild family.
My God.
I mean, is Armie Hammer one of those?
Yes, he's the grandson of Armand, great-grandson of Julius.
Yeah, so what a wild family.
There might be one great missing in there, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actor is straight line.
Okay. So, that hadn't made that connection, but the guy you mentioned, Scott, was a American engineer who, just like a lot of people with kind of progressive sympathies, And you have to remember, this is all pre-purges. It's before people understood the violence, of the Stalin.
And the Holodomor, or what do you say it? The Ukrainian forced starvation, which is going on sort of as this is happening.
Right,
yeah.
Right. The sort of man-made famine in Ukraine that killed many millions of people in about 1933, and which was basically ignored by the Western press. You mentioned the Metropole. It's this hotel in Moscow where the Western journalists were all kind of forced to stay, and so they were living they were getting caviar and vodka and having good times, and failing at their main job, which was to report what was going on. And so there was kind of they were very easily manipulated by the Soviet propaganda apparatus into kind of misreporting or underreporting what was going on in Ukraine at that time. And so, one of the things that happened over the course of my working on this project was the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and so that caused me to read Red Famine, book by Anne Applebaum, which is a just horrifying account of the Holodomor, and so that ends up being somewhat incorporated into the book.
Well, I will tell the audience that the last page of this book is so good it's almost cruel and unfair, because it's the best cliffhanger of all time. It's this twist. Like, normally a twist happens and you're like, oh wow, what a twist. This twist happens and the book ends and you're like, where's the second book? I need it right now.
Yeah, I know. This is the perennial problem of series. So like you can ask George R.R. Martin about about what happens when you write a series of books, and do you finish the whole thing and bringing it out all at once, which is kind of what we did with the Baroque cycle, or do you bring them out as they're done? And so we had a lot of conversations about where to draw the line under Polostan, and because you want to make it feel like the book is over, but there is more to come.
Well, there is a real sense of at least a big chapter break. Like, you've accomplished a ton, and you've accomplished sort of, it feels like part one. Like, this character has now arrived at sort of part one completion. But man, it's the best ending ever. I read it. It was just the best, like, last page of a book ever. Really good. And I, to the John le Carré comment earlier, it's written with such terrific prose, in such a literary style, in the way that John le Carré starts to break down genres. Like, this isn't espionage fiction. It's just a great book, period. Same thing here.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Yeah. I think I stepped on his dog's toe.
Le Carré's dog's toe?
Yeah.
When and where did that happen?
It was when I was doing research for the big article about cables, about submarine cables in the 90s. Wired hired me to write this big article about submarine cables, and one of the big cable station in England where the submarine cables go south to Europe and Asia is in the town called Porthcurno in Cornwall, and so I was with the photographer Alex Tarani, and we were wandering around looking at maps, trying to figure out. We were trying to find a cable station on the coast of Cornwall, and this nice guy came up to us. He was walking his little dog, and white-haired gentleman, and he asked if he could help us find something, because we were obviously lost tourists. So we started chatting with him, and I was kind of shifting my weight, and I heard this yelp, and I looked down. I had stepped on his dog's toe, and the dog was, yelped and moved back. So I was very apologetic and down and petted the dog, and kind of made up for it. And he was very, very, very cool about it. He didn't take offense. But later on, I was reading about John le Carré, and he lives in such and such place in Cornwall.
Oh,
Here's
my
what
God,
he looks
that's
like.
the guy. That's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if only he knew who had stepped on his dog's tail, he would have.
I don't think
he would have been thrilled to meet you.
I don't think he would have cared. But,
So before we get into the lightning round for Neal Stephenson, what is next? Because I know, of course, book 2 of this, but you have varied interests, and I know this was a project that was years in the making before you fully turned to it to dedicate yourself. Are you on book 2 now?
Yeah. So the guy that she meets at the end of Polostan is sort of the point of view character of the next
who names the book, really?
volume. Yeah. So we're kind of handing it off to him. So I've got a couple hundred pages of that written. I'll try to get the rest out, once this all dies down. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, then. I'm going to have the last little bits of this, and then we're into the lightning round.
Okay.
Your favorite book as a kid?
Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein. You ever heard of this?
No, I've not read that.
This kid, everyday suburban New Jersey kid, but a little bit in the future, mails in a coupon from the back of a cereal box for a sweepstakes, and the prize is a spacesuit, and he wins. So this spacesuit shows up in a box, and he takes it out to his dad's workshop and turns it on and gets it working. So he's walking around his backyard in the spacesuit, and a flying saucer lands, and he's plunged into the middle of a huge drama involving aliens and all that. So it's very much a young adult novel, but it's just brilliantly written and just great action and fun, and still holds up pretty well today.
That's great. I will check that one out. I'll get it for my son, too.
Oh, yeah.
Book or books you're reading now?
The reading...
when you're on tour, it's a little tricky, too. I mean, hotels and traveling, but...
The Golden Road by William Dalrymple, which is a history book. So he's basically saying... I mean, this is summarized for me by someone else, so I could be wrong, but the idea is we've heard of the Silk Road from China to Europe, and he's kind of saying, well, really the Silk Road, as we think of it, was just like a minor off-ramp of the Golden Road, which is kind of India to China. So he's trying to put India into what he thinks is its proper context, in the in that history.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, here's a show favorite. Your least attended book event ever.
So it was in Edinburgh, Scotland, at a Barnes and Noble, and or maybe it's probably a Barnes and Noble, a big chain store. And so I was on this tour, and attendance had been pretty good, like up and down. But
which book?
Man, probably the Baroque cycle, maybe Cryptonomicon, but sort of that era. So I take the train to Edinburgh, check into the hotel, go to the Barnes and Noble, and they've got books for me to sign. I sign the books, and we go to their event space. They've cleared a space. They've set up all these chairs, and we're waiting for the hour to come by, and zero. Right. Nobody showed up at all, right? And so the people at the bookstore were just incredibly embarrassed, and really having a bad day. And then their phone starts ringing, and it's the staff of the Glasgow Barnes and Noble.
Oh no!
Yeah,
everyone's there.
Yeah, everyone's there. Oh no! Yeah. And they're like, where the fuck is Neal Stephenson? And so So, that was definitely my least attended with 0. But it wasn't, it made up for a little bit in the fact that there were some people who actually wanted to go. They were just at the wrong.
Oh my gosh.
Wrong store.
That's the first time I've heard that answer, that it was the wrong store. My God.
Yeah.
All right. Switching gears a little bit to something more scary. The greatest threat to humanity.
So it's either too much carbon in the atmosphere or the fact that we cannot agree on what is real. And so I think we can solve the carbon thing with technology, and I think we will. I don't know how to solve the other one, though. That's a tough one.
It's a great way to put it, too. We cannot agree on what's real.
Yeah.
And more, it's like we're all looking at the same thing with two wildly different interpretations of what we just saw.
Well, people just believe what they want to believe, and there's no consequences for that.
Mm-hmm.
So until there's consequences for just randomly believing ridiculous shit, there's no, people aren't going to change their ways.
Yeah. That's a great answer. Best sci-fi movie of all time?
Aliens.
Nice. And did you see the new one? They just have
No,
it's
I
out
haven't-
now. It's like
haven't
streaming
seen
or
it
something.
yet.
I haven't seen it yet either.
Haven't seen it.
That holds up. I just showed it to my kids are 15, 13, 11. I just showed it to them. And
Alien.
they were as into it as I was all those years ago. It really totally holds up.
Well, the thing is that Cameron writes, he portrays intelligent characters. And so, like the moment.
Oh, you're right. So it was James Cameron, not Ridley Scott. I said Ridley Scott earlier.
Yeah. So the clincher in that movie is when they get their asses kicked in the first engagement, and Ripley says, "We should take off and nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure." And you, as the viewer, are like, "Hell yes! Yeah, like obviously that's what you should do." Like, finally there's an intelligent person in a movie, Whereas in so many movies, so many movies rely on the characters doing idiotic stuff because it makes things easy for the writers.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, immediately once they see what's going on, they're like, okay, we have to nuke the site from orbit. And the rest of the movie is about trying to do that. That, in a way, kind of clinches it in the minds of most viewers that, okay, these are real people behaving the way real people would.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and here is another slightly mind-bending question, which I'm dying to hear your answer on.
Okay.
The outcome of which of the following wars had the greatest significance in history? And it's just sort of an additional sort of qualifying explanation here on this question. Like, if you imagine an alternate history of the other group won the war, which would be the most meaningful? So, of the following three, the American Civil War, the Russian Civil War, which is addressed in your book, and World War II.
Well, I mean, realistically, you kind of have to say World War II, but everyone probably says that. So it's kind of interesting to think about the Russian Civil War, which is a thing that a lot of Americans aren't super aware of. I wasn't particularly, but had to learn more about it for Polostan. They're like, one of the consequences of the outcome was that what the Germans thought of as the Eastern Front just collapsed. So they got to put all of their energy into the Western Front. But at the beginning of World War I, there's this freaky situation, like, it's hard to believe this is true, where the leaders of England, Germany, and Russia were like cousins. Mm-hmm. The King of England, the Kaiser Wilhelm, and the Tsar of Russia were like literally cousins, who would, send like little letters back and forth.
The Willie and Nicky letters.
Yeah, Billy, Dear Billy, how are you? I enjoyed shooting grouse with you on your estate, send my best to your kids. It's that kind of thing. So it's very 19th century. it's like inconceivable, today that hereditary royals could matter in that way, but they really mattered then. So, a world where those guys win is a very different world, and a world where the Russia doesn't become the Soviet Union is a very different world, and that's actually a great.
That's totally true. I mean, I actually think the answer is the Russian Civil War, because prior to that, communism was just Karl Marx sort of musing about and with some writings until Lenin put it into practice for the first time anywhere in the world in basically 1918.
Yeah.
But for that, this narrowest of apertures that the Bolsheviks threaded. I mean, it's almost impossible that they prevailed. It had to be World War I going on.
Right.
And all these other things, Rasputin. No, you needed all these things to happen.
Crazy shit going on that made that possible.
It was so unlikely. And then so suddenly, but for that, communism would not have shaped the 20th century, wouldn't have had a bipolar world around all that, but for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's actually, it would be a great premise for a counterfactual. So somebody's already written, I think Robert Harris wrote Fatherland, which was a novel set in England after the Nazis win World War II, right? Yeah.
Oh, and it was made into The Man in the High Castle is the alternate history on that, right?
Right.
It was I can't remember who wrote the book, but yeah.
All right. So that's been done. So the sorry, I'm blanking on the name right now, but the Philip K. Dick.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's unexplored territory, as far as I know. The counterfactual of what if the Bolsheviks had been trounced by the
Mensheviks or somebody
whites,
else, or the whites come in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anyone done the counterfactual on the American Civil War?
They must have. Right. They must have. Yeah. Yeah. But I don't. I can't cite specifics.
Well, you're too busy to take that on. You got other stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So last question for Neal Stephenson. One piece of advice for the audience.
For the whole audience?
On any topic. Could be writing, life, cryptocurrency.
I've gotten interested in a philosophy called Fallibilism, which comes from an American philosopher from the 1870s called Charles Saunders Peirce. But it's basically, it's just that the right path to follow is to assume that you might be wrong. That's really all it is. But it makes a lot of sense in a world where it's too crowded with people who are completely convinced they're right about one thing or another.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, study fallibilism.
So just sort of walk through a test case of what if everything I'm doing right now is wrong?
Yeah. And, I could be wrong about what I think. And so, and once you start seeing things through that lens, it's like it changes how you think about politics and everything else. I think it makes you into basically a very politically moderate person.
A slightly more open-minded person, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of, veering to left or right in terms of what you think should be done politically, it puts you in more of a kind of middle of the road conservative, not in a political sense, but conservative in the sense of, things aren't that bad. let's not screw it up.
Well, maybe this solves the riddle of what you identified earlier as the greatest threat to humanity. If we can all get into fallibilism, we'll start seeing what's real.
Hear, hear.
All right. Well, cheers. Neal, thank you so much. This was awesome. It was a real treat for me.
I enjoyed it too. Yeah. Thanks for having me on your program.
My pleasure.
And thanks for the excellent margarita.